Video game controller tier list. Let's get her going. What in the world is this thing? Sega Saturn? Looks a lot like the Genesis controller. I don't know if I've actually used this. Maybe at a convention or something. Hard to rank. I don't like the Genesis controller that much. Like, I think it might be this one, because I remember playing Sega Genesis games and the controller having a whole bunch of buttons. And I mean, I liked having a lot of buttons to press with your right thumb. I do remember the Genesis controllers feeling kind of like cheap, like they were just a cheaper plastic or something. They just felt like breakable. Not that they ever broke on me, but they were just never that great. The Joy-Cons for the Nintendo Switch, really inconvenient for myself, having not even like the largest hands. Like, I don't have like specifically large hands, but I'm not like a small guy. Like, they're just too small. I wish they were bigger. Like, if you're playing a game where you're using like one of them as a controller, say you're playing Mario Kart with a bunch of people, you have to use one of these as a controller. It's uncomfortable. It's way too small. Using them as where they like go into the slots of the controller, if you know what I mean. Like, there's a controller and you put the Joy-Cons in it and it like forms a normal controller. That even isn't that great. You kind of, it makes the most sense to use them with the like the screen, the console itself, the like gamepad. But even that, it's like you may as well just use the Pro controller. The Pro controller is a lot better. I'll put it B tier. Wii U. The Wii U itself. Again, just get a Pro controller and play games on the Pro controller. The Wii U, I'd put. I mean, probably above the Joy-Cons, but not great. Now it looks like a Switch Pro controller. One of the better controllers. Like, it feels solid. No complaints about it. Might end up in A tier. Not sure yet. Looks like this list is like all over the place. Let's try to stick with Nintendo for now. We'll go with the N64 controller. Really cool. Some of the first, like one of the first controllers, possibly the first, where you could have kind of more dynamic controls. You can see on the controller itself, you've got a D-pad on the left side. On the right side, you have the C directional buttons, and then in the middle you have a joystick. There's a trigger on the reverse side, which is just unbelievably cool. The controllers are really weird design with the like 3 handles, but really allowed for some really cool gameplay to go on. The Turok franchise, the iconic shooter, the most iconic for the N64 is like GoldenEye or Perfect Dark. But if you play the Turok series, specifically Turok Rage Wars, where you'll just get a way better multiplayer experience in Turok Rage Wars, it's kind of an entire game designed around a first-person shooter multiplayer. It's actually just ridiculously incredible. It's one of those just S tier first-person shooters, like Time Splitters, where it's just incredible, but never really got the props that it deserved. But with Turok, you're moving your character around with the C controls, so essentially the D-pad, but also you have access to like the like A and B buttons, and then you're looking around with the stick. So, like, if you could imagine playing GoldenEye, but you were moving with the direction with the D-pad, and then looking around with the stick, right? Like, that's way more dynamic control that gives you infinitely more control than you're ever going to have in GoldenEye. Go play GoldenEye. You'll be like, this is the most frustrating thing ever. I can't believe I thought this was like good. I mean, it was great for the time, absolutely, no question about it. But it's for the time, and even at the end of the N64's run, there was better first-person shooters. Once they figured out this is how we need to design first-person shooters, like, you need to have more movement, and it just feels incredible once you actually play those games. I think it does leave a little bit to be desired, so I'm going to rank it right here below the Switch Pro controller. GameCube always felt like weird to me. I never played enough GameCube to like get used to the controller. I like that it has more buttons than the N64 controller. I probably like it more than the N64, but I can't place it any higher than that. Like the Switch controller, the Pro controller, just it gives you everything you need out of a controller, so that there's no need to like overcomplicate it. It's simple, it's basic, it gets everything done you need it to do. We'll go to the Wiimote with nunchaku. The Wiimote was just very innovative. Again, like compare that to a Joy-Con. The Wiimote, you can play games, you can turn it on its side and use it as a controller, and it actually fits in adults' hands, right? Like it's actually like more usable, and just obviously really great for its time. Allows these like awesome motion controls. Because of the motion controls in certain aspects, the Joy-Con is better. The Joy-Con just happens to suck, you know. So I'd have to put the Wiimote higher than the Joy-Cons, higher than the Wii U. Original Nintendo, which nobody called this the NES back in the day. Like, yeah, I know content creators like Pat the NES Punk says that he referred to it as the NES back in the day. I'm sure people did, but like everyone just called it Nintendo. It was just Nintendo. Like most movies and stuff, they just call it Nintendo. It was the Nintendo. It wasn't the NES. It wasn't until these content creators like Angry Video Game Nerd, Pat the NES Punk, that people started calling these NESs, and like it's just the Nintendo, and then the next one was the Super Nintendo. That's just what they were, what they were referred to by common folk, I guess. So the original Nintendo controller, I mean, it got the job done for the time. Just super reliable. Like, these things are sturdy. They don't feel phenomenal in the hand. Like, they didn't quite... I gotta rank it lower. I mean, it's so legendary. It's so good. Like, I can pop some of these things in. I'm pretty sure, like, we possibly have a Nintendo controller that's older than I am. Like these controllers, most of them are older than me. These are like late 80s, early 90s. Like, these are old things, and they still work just fine. So that alone is just ridiculously incredible, right? Like, use a PS2 controller today, most of them, the thumbsticks are total trash. Buttons are sticking. I mean, I've never had an issue with the buttons because I'm not spilling things on the controllers. I'm not beating the heck out of the buttons. And since we're talking about wear and tear, the N64 controllers, if you get like an original N64 controller and you play Mario Party, don't play the like tug of war game or any game that forces you to like spin the joystick as much as possible, because that grinded down so many of these controllers, right? Like, the controller just wasn't designed for that to be what you're doing. And any any controllers from back in the day that are around, that is going to damage the controller. Don't do it. Just play the next mini game. Don't do it, please. Trust me. I might leave this original Nintendo controller in S tier for that reason alone, but it is definitely getting defeated by the Super Nintendo controller, which is exactly the same, right? This thing is sturdy. These things are still working today. Decades later, they're working just fine. They work flawlessly. And yeah, just no issues. Very sturdy controller. These things have been dropped more than any other controllers, and they're just well designed to take it. Super Nintendo controller feels way better in your hand than original Nintendo. It has more buttons. It has the L, the R, the Y, the X, I think it was. Added more buttons. Just really good build quality. Great controller. I don't think anything can really top the Super Nintendo controller or even the Super Nintendo as a console, even though I'm more of a PS2 fan. Let's go to Xbox. The original, the Xbone controller, the giant, heaviest, craziest, just a tank of a controller. Just lunacy. Like, look at the distance between the white and the black buttons and like the thumbstick, and like the distance from the triggers to like the thumbstick or the D-pad is incredible, right? Like, I could genuinely see how somebody would have the actual opposite issue that I have with the Joy-Con being too small. The Xbone controller is too big. Like, it's quite big. I've never had an issue with it, but I could see how some people could. It's clunky in it's like how huge it is, but it works just fine. Like, some of the best I remember playing on it, and like it was sweet to have that like reactive trigger. So I give the original Xbox a lot of credit, but its controller, I mean, I liked it. It was just fine, but I think I just got to put it high B. I can't put it A. Now, a lot of their controller designs past the Xbone are pretty similar. Like, I don't know what this is. I think it has to be I think that's just a different model of the Xbone controller. I think it's just the smaller one. Yeah, because it's got the white and the black button. So it's just the like better designed one. And it's the one that I remember playing with more than the giant one. So I think this one I will put in A tier. Now the Xbox 360 controller, although being awesome, legendary, one that I played the absolute life out of, the sticks wear down. They wear down quite a bit. Now, some people wear down these sticks incredibly fast. Like, I don't know how harsh they're being with their fingers to where they're wearing these down within like 6 months. You use somebody else's controller and the sticks are just a nightmare, and it's like, you've had this controller for 6 months. I've had a controller for like 3 years and the sticks are fine. But like, it's kind of like the sticks would wear and get less traction within a couple months. Like, no matter what, as long as you're playing it consistently, you're going to lose that traction. But then it should like be at that point for like 2+ years. Then it starts to get like thin and like worn out. And that's from like heavy play. Like, I played a crazy amount of Halo 2 and Halo 3. So it loses some points from just long-term duration, but it definitely had some cool aspects to it. I would put it just above the smaller Xbone controller, Which brings us to the Xbox One, which I think is also the same controller for Xbox Series X. I haven't played a Series X. I want to get one, but honestly, I'm kind of waiting for like a really cool designed one. And when it like makes financial sense, when there's more of a reason for me to get one, I have the PS5, which I wish I had the Spider-Man. Like I saw an advertisement or something, or I don't know, it was like a contest, and it was for this Spider-Man 2 PS5, where the PS5 has like these weird like wings on the sides, and the Spider-Man 2 one looked incredible. I'm waiting for a Series X to have a design, because it also kind of has such a weird, it almost looks like a router or something. It looks like your modem. It'd be nice to just get like a little bit, like a cool version of that. Because I have the Spider-Man PS4, and it's like just a beautiful thing. It's like a beautiful car. Like this thing is popping on all fronts. And I want something like that if I'm gonna get a current generation console anytime soon. Granted, I know you could just get one painted or what have you, do it yourself, but that's even more work. This controller though is a noticeable improvement. I played Xbox One. Not enough to like really wear down a controller, to be honest. I'll just put it above the others because I haven't used it as much as the Switch Pro controller. We'll go to the other Sega controller, the Dreamcast. This thing is lunacy. This thing is out of its mind. Like I don't even remember what this screen in the middle is for. I've only used these like a couple of times, because what lunatic had the Dreamcast? Like it's just so bizarre looking. I mean, really, just look at it. It is. There's this weird screen. You have like a directional pad and a thumbstick on the left side. There might have been triggers, but the craziest thing, besides this controller being possibly larger than the original Xbox controller and feeling far like inferior in terms of like material used, like everything feels off about it. It feels like it's made out of cheap material. It's so ugly in its design. It's so large, but the worst thing is the cord coming out of the bottom. Like, you wouldn't think that it would make that big of a difference, but it changes like everything. It changes the whole like balance of the controller. It's almost like the controller, it makes this like pulling effect. Really hard to explain. You wouldn't think that you're actually like balancing a controller when you're holding it as much as you really are, and it just completely throws that off. Maybe if you like got used to it, it wouldn't be that bad, but the 2 times I've played a Dreamcast, I'm like, this controller is lunacy. How did this get made? Absolute F tier. The PlayStation, you can see the controllers, they all look exactly the same. It is what it is. We'll go through them in order if we even can, based off of now we can. The PlayStation, the first controller, sturdy. You don't have the thumbsticks to worry about, so you use a PlayStation controller, as long as the buttons don't stick when you press them, then it'll work fine. Like I've got PS1 controllers and they work fine. No issues. Cool, solid controller. Hate to do it. Absolutely hate to do it, but I'm putting it above these Xbox controllers. It's just better. I don't think it's as good as the N64. That console generation was, against each other. They were in the same generation, but I probably agree with people that PlayStation was the better console, but I think N64 had a better controller. It was just more dynamic, more going on, allowed for more possibilities. PlayStation had better games, but you kind of had to dig deep, right? Like when you think of that generation, most of the big games you think about is the Nintendo games, the N64. So like I personally, I would say the N64 is a lot better than the PlayStation 1, but I also think people's arguments as to why the PlayStation 1 is better are very valid. We'll talk about the second generation of PlayStation 1 controllers that had the thumbsticks. I believe that's what is being represented here. Really cool that they did that, adding even more. Solid. Then we'll get to the actual PS2 controller. PS2 controller just ramps that up. PS2 controller will put above. I'll even put it above the GameCube controller. Now GameCube controllers, they're still popping. Like any GameCube controller I use, it's working. The sticks are working. It feels super sturdy. It's probably a better, higher quality build material than the PlayStation 2 controller. But the PlayStation 2 controller feels a lot better in your hands if you're playing games with particular movements where you're using both sticks. It's going to feel better on the PlayStation 2, just the build quality isn't as good. So your PlayStation 2 controller thumbsticks are going to wear out. I really hope that the third-party controllers for the PlayStation 2 get a lot better. I've talked to people at game stores and what have you about finding a good third-party one so I can just buy new PlayStation 2 controllers that are going to work just as good as the originals because of that thumbstick issue, and they just don't really exist yet. I hope they do, but just the way the controller feels, it's that iconic. It's really the beginning of that, I feel, that iconic PlayStation controller, which I guess kind of started in the later model PlayStation 1 controller, which is probably why I feel that way, but it's really good otherwise. And these specific Nintendo controllers are really weird. Now the PlayStation 3 controller feels a little bit, it's probably a little bit better than the PlayStation 2 controller. I just don't like it as much. I'd say it probably deserves to be ranked higher, but just based off nostalgia, PS2 was better. Or are one of these the... I think this is the PS4 controller, and maybe this tier list was made before the PS5. This looks like a PS4 controller. Let me see. Yeah, it's definitely a PS4 controller. What am I thinking? The PS5 is the redesign. PS5 controller would definitely be S tier. PS4 is definitely S tier. I think I gotta put it above the original Nintendo, but I do not put it above the Super Nintendo. For the time, I feel like the Super Nintendo was just such a step up that we probably haven't ever seen before and will probably never see again. PlayStation 4 controller, absolutely nothing wrong with it. Great controller. Quality's there. Feels good, feels right. It just, so does the Super Nintendo. And it's Super Nintendo, come on, it's unbeatable. Hope you like the tier list. More tier lists to come. Let me know what tier lists you want to see and why you might feel that I don't know, maybe the Dreamcast or the Genesis, these Sega controllers, maybe I'm wrong about them. I don't think I am, because I've used them. I've used the Genesis controller a lot. I had one as a kid. I played Mortal Kombat quite a bit. It just, you're pressing the buttons. It's more so that the shell of the controller just doesn't feel nearly as to the quality of the Nintendo controllers.